Hello. Today I'm going to be reassembling this MTD 1000. I've got all my parts laid out, the frame, the engine, bolts, part of the drivetrain, wheels, and then over here I've got all the parts that I painted. So they're all ready to go and I'm going to start assembling them. First things first, I'm going to work on the frame and attach the rear axle. There's 4 bolts that go in here with 4 nuts to hold them in place. I've got my square on the floor. I'm going to be aligning the axle when I go to tighten it. Now with the back axle in place, I can move to the front. So I'm just going to hold this up, and then there's a big bolt that goes to the middle. It has a grease fitting, and there's a little elastic nut that goes on the end. And then this allows it to pivot so that you can go on uneven ground. Now I'm going to put on the axles for the front wheels. They just slide through the front axle, and then there's a little collar that goes on. I'm going to tighten that collar, but leave it loose enough so that it doesn't bind, because I want these to be able to turn freely, just like that. Now I'm going to go and do the other side. It's the same thing. I grease this up. It's got a grease fitting on it as well. I push it through, and then I'm going to be putting my collar on it. Each collar has a little, I think they're called lock screws. And I just tighten that, holds the collar in place, makes it so that this won't come out. Now I've got the hubs. There's a little dust cover that I put on there. So I'm going to slide this onto its axle, and then there's another collar, and that's just going to follow it on. So I put on the collar, and then I'm going to tighten it up. And I check that it spins freely, and it does. All these hubs, by the way, they have grease fittings. Now this hub I'm going to put on. Slides on no problem. The collar wouldn't go on though, so I have to file it down just a bit. Part of the shaft was marred from where that set screw went onto the shaft. So I filed it down, I just cleaned it up quickly. Now I can put the collar on. And then the set screw, I tighten that up. This one I had to replace, the original was all messed up. And there it turns. Now right now I'm back at the rear axle. There's this piece here that's going to mount the frame, and I'm just going to screw it up and tighten these bolts that go into it. With that back axle all done, I'm going to come up and I'm just going to start assembling the frame. There's no right way or wrong way to do this. I'm just going to be adding parts. This particular side is where the power takeoff control, all those other controls are going to be. So I set that up. Now I want to begin working on this, the power takeoff itself proper. It needs these spacers. So there's 4 fairly thick, beefy spacers. You can see them in the lid there. And you're going to want to make sure that you add them when you put this back. I don't know that it'll necessarily run well without those spacers. So I've got 1 bolt in. Now I can put in the second bolt, making sure to remember my spacer. These first 2 bolts are always the most difficult to put in, but once these first 2 bolts are put in, then I can come back and put my third in. Slides in nicely because everything's held. And then I can finish with the 4th bolt. And then I tighten that with the ratchet. All right. Now this piece is basically going to make it so that the belt doesn't splay out too much. It's going to keep the belt from going off the rails. So I'm just going to put that in and put these bolts in finger tight. This is one of those pieces that once everything's together, I'll do the final adjustment then. Now this is where a spring goes. This spring is for part of the clutch system and the brake system. So it goes onto this little retainer here, and I'm just going to be putting the bolts in and tightening them up. It's an easy piece to forget. Now I've got, this controls the implement level. It's got 4 bolts, it's got grease fittings on it, so I'm just putting these bolts in one by one. Greasing the bolts, because I don't want them to seize by rusting. Now with all the bolts in place, I can go and tighten them with the ratchet. Now the clutch lever attaches to this. It's its pivot point, so I'm going to screw in all these bolts. There's 3 in total. Now I can come back with the ratchet and I can tighten them down. Now this whole thing, this controls the tension of the belt to the power takeoff, so it engages and disengages the power takeoff. There's just a shoulder bolt that passes through there, so I put it through. You want washers to separate moving surfaces. There's an elastic nut that goes on the outside, and then I can tighten it just with my wrench and with my ratchet. It spins freely with minimal sloppage, so that's what I like to see. Now I can add in the rest of the system. This is going to actually carry a pulley that will control the tension. Again, there's a shoulder bolt, so I pass that through, and then it goes through an accompanying hole in the frame. You heard it just snap into place there. Ooh, there's some thunder outside. Add on the elastic nut, and then that should hold the whole assembly in place. And again, this is for controlling the power takeoff, whether it engages or disengages, because it controls the tension of the belt on that power takeoff. There, operates smoothly, perfect. Now I can add the sheath. This is the one that I said tensions and detensions the power takeoff. So I'm adding my washers, and then this one, I'm pretty sure it's an elastic nut from what I remember. I tighten it on with my ratchet, and there you go. It spins nice and freely. And now I'm just putting on the pulleys to make sure that it's aligned, so that the pulleys are going straight, so that they're not having to change direction, and that they turn freely. That shows how it tensions. Now I'm putting on some more stuff. This is going to be where a bunch of the braking and a bunch of the clutch stuff is going to go later, so I'm just getting this in place now. Here's this little flange slash housing type thing. I put the bolts in and then I tighten it with the ratchet. Now I'm going to work on the 90-degree drive. This is what's going to take the output from the engine and then shift it 90 degrees. I'm putting these bolts on. I'm going to leave it all finger tight though, because this is a piece that needs to be adjusted once the engine is on the tractor. There, I've put another bolt through, and then I can put in its lock, washer, and then the nut. Now I'm going to add the pulley. This is the drive pulley that goes to the rear transmission axle. It has a nut that actually fits into a little recess on the pulley. So I'm just going to tighten it by hand, and then I can turn the shaft to tighten it the rest of the way because of that recess on the pulley. So you see here how I'm tightening it by turning the shaft. Now I can put on all the stuff for the clutch. So I've got these spiral pins is what they're called. They're like little springs in the form of a pin, I guess would be the best way to put it. So I hammer it in as far as I can, as far as I'm comfortable with, and then I use a pin drive to put it in the rest of the way. Now I add one of the springs for the clutch. I add the bearing for the clutch lever. I add what I consider to be a return spring. I don't understand fully what it does. Now I can add on the clutch lever itself, and you'll see how it goes against the bearing there. These are going to hold the friction plates. This is basically the clutch itself. Here's the friction plate. This is going to be connected to the engine. And then here is a pressure plate. And this all has to be compressed in order for me to drive on the spiral pins. Those springs need to be tight. Make sure you kind of hammer on it if you're only clamping from one side, because otherwise the thing can bind as you put it on the shaft. So now I'm putting in the spiral pins, just hammering them in. This one limits how far that pressure plate can go in only one direction. It's got a little slot. And then here's the final spiral pin. That's going to hold the whole assembly in place. Everything up to this point has been kind of scary. I've been wearing safety glasses in case that whole clutch flies apart. Now I can bring my 90-degree drive to the tractor. I can put it in place. You're going to see where that lever goes on its pivot that we installed earlier. So I get that ready. I get everything kind of in position, and then I'm going to be putting on all the bolts and all the nuts and everything else this whole system needs. Before going too far though, I need to take this off because I actually forgot to put on a plate that needs to go on the 90-degree drive. It's just, I would call it a dust plate. It's going to just be a tight fit over that 90-degree drive and keep dust from getting in. So I have to take all the bolts off all over again. If you can, try and remember to put this on. I forgot to. To actually install the 90-degree drive, there's a plate that goes on the bottom, and this is what the bolts are going to be passing through. So you get that plate in place, and then you can begin putting in the bolts. There's 4 bolts. It's a little difficult to get it all to align. It's kind of hard. So don't get discouraged. I have to do everything myself, so I hope you'll be able to as well. Now I'm putting this pulley back on its sheath. I just want it in place because I'm trying to test this all and get the tension right. There's the pivot shoulder bolt. You saw there was some wear on it. It's not enough that makes me actually worry. I'm not going to replace it. Snaps into place very nicely. Now I can grease it up, add a little bit of a washer, and then I'm going to add the elastic nut that holds it in place and tighten it down. And I'm using the ratchet to tighten it all the way down. Now we're at the back. We need to add this tensioner type thing. This is going to control the belt tension to the rear transmission. So I'm going to put on the shoulder bolt. I'm going to put on a sheath with the bearing all greased up prior. I'm going to add the other half. And then a washer and a nut. I believe this is supposed to be an elastic nut. Mine was pretty worn out. Now the whole thing goes on either side of this housing at the back axle. You just put a bolt through there, There's going to be a nut that goes on the other side. I'm going to tighten that whole system up in the rear. And you can see here how it works. It's hard to get a good view once everything else is installed. So now I'm doing the final tightening. I'm adding the tensioner. There's the tensioner with everything else installed. This just shows it's going to push down on this sheath, which is going to tension the pulley, and you can adjust the height with that bolt. Now I'm putting on, I call this the turtle back, the turtle shell. That's what it seems like to me. It's really just part of the frame. It's going to add a lot of stiffness to the machine. Unfortunately, it's going to add a lot of weight as well. So it's just this big piece of metal, pretty thick metal too. I can't get it over because I'm trying to push it down on a thicker part of the frame. So I'm going to have to adjust it. And there you see it slide in. There's a part where the frame necks down, and that's where it needs to go. So it's kind of inevitable that the paint's going to get scratched up at this stage, but I'm okay with a little bit of scratching. Now I'm making sure that I can move the transmission lever. The gear shift works fine, so I'm happy with that. And then you may recall there's a little plate on the rear axle. This tortoise shell is going to mount to that plate now with 3 bolts. So I just put the bolts in place. This is where some alignment issues begin to start. So I have to use hammers and I have to use tapered drifts to try and get my bolts in place. I'm coming back now with the ratchet and tightening them. Here's a bolt on the side of the tortoise shell, and it doesn't really want to go in very well. This is an example of where a tapered drift would help. So you see I'm having to pound on the tortoise shell to get it to align. This is where the parts they're just a little bit out of alignment, so they need some help. Here's the tapered drift that I've been talking about so much. I'm really glad I had one of these. It lets you pry these 2 parts together. You just push it through one of the holes, and then you can move the parts ever so slightly. You only need to move them a few millimeters or fractions of an inch, but without the tapered drift, it's virtually impossible to accomplish that. Now on the back, it was really stubborn, so I try hammering it first. The thing rebounds though, so to get this rear bolt on, I end up having to take a clamp to it and clamping it in place to get the holes to align. But with that clamp there, I'm able to actually put the bolt through its hole, and I'm able to turn it in. Now you're getting to see, this is for the clutch. It's going to take a little bit of thinking and figuring out to pass it through that hole when it interferes at the top. The solution is you just have to kind of turn it, just like so. And then you can pass it and turn it up, and that's the position that it should be in. So now I can add this flange that it's going to ride in. You can see that there's nuts welded to the bottom. I'm going to be passing in bolts from the top. So I'm just going to get this into position for now. Now I can come around to the top. I can put this piece back in. I put it on earlier, but then I had to take it out. And the bolts are going to pass through this and into the flange on the bottom that you saw in the previous shot. So I'm tightening those by hand. There's just going to be 2 bolts. I'm going to tighten them the rest of the way with the ratchet. Before I do that though, I take my square, and I'm just going to make sure that this shaft is 90 degrees to the frame. And then I can tighten the bolts the rest of the way, all the way down. Now I need to put in all the hardware that holds it in place. Basically just this big washer and then a pin that goes through there. This is one of those, I believe it's called a cotter pin. You splay the ends after you push it through, and that holds it in place. Now, this whole pulley runs around a sprocket, and it's got a chain for the clutch. So you pass this through here. It's very similar to a bicycle chain, where a bicycle chain breaks. You've basically got a loose link, so I'm able to push it through the loose link through the chain and through this clutch mechanism. And then I can put on everything else. I put on the little plates, I put on the spring, and my chain is now attached to that lever where the clutch pedal will go. So in order to add the rest of the stuff for the clutch assembly, I need to add this side plate. So I'm going to put some bolts in to hold it in place. Thankfully, the clutch shaft helps me locate it pretty easily. I've again got my tapered drift to help me align these two holes, and then I just use the ratchet to tighten it all the way up. Now for the clutch pedal itself, I just kind of turn it on, push it on, and then I have to orient everything so that it's right. It's possible to get this wrong by half a rotation, so make sure you're looking at the manual and getting it the way that it should go. This again is a system with a spiral pin. I had a lot of difficulty here though, so I had to drive the spiral pin into the foot pedal, and then I used a drift to align the rest of it. So here you see me aligning it with the drift, and now I'm going to be able to hammer it in the rest of the way. And now the clutch pedal is on. This shows you the rest of the stuff that I'm going to have to do with this clutch pedal. So here's where the sprocket will go. The chain is going to drive on this sprocket. It just rides on this bolt plainly. There's not really anything to control the sprocket position. It's able to float back and forth. You kind of want that because the clutch isn't going to be... The clutch is going to be describing an arc as it goes in and out. So now I'm threading the chain over the sprocket. I'm pulling it through the clutch lever. That shows you its action and how it's moving the mechanism below. I'm now putting on everything I need, which is including a return spring. That's rather important. This whole endeavor becomes difficult without that spring, so don't forget to add it on. I push it through the clutch lever, and then the tension of this whole clutch lever thing is controlled by a nut. So I'm going to add a spacer because there's quite a lot of looseness in it. And then there's an elastic nut that goes on at the end. It's kind of hard to tighten. You kind of have to hold the back with a pair of pliers. Now this is showing how the movement of the pedal is translated into movement at the clutch lever. This is one of those things you adjust at the end when everything's in place. Speaking of which, I'm bringing the engine into play now. It's rather heavy. If you have a helper, ask for their help. I unfortunately didn't, so I had to do it myself. It's a 10 horsepower engine. I think it's about the biggest displacement you can get for a single cylinder engine. So you want to align it with that 90-degree gearbox. And then you can see where the pins are going to go through the pressure plate. There's also a pilot bearing on the shaft. You can move the pressure plate by activating the clutch, which is kind of why, in my mind, the clutch has to go on first. And then you just have to keep working at it until you're able to slide it in like this. And then things aren't quite over yet because there's some more adjustment that needs to be done. So now I've bolted down the engine, and I need to adjust this whole clutch mechanism. I want to make sure that the engine is in line with the 90-degree shaft. To do that, I need to see that the gap there that I was measuring is the same everywhere. So I just go and I'm able to tilt the 90-degree gear shaft slightly. I'm able to position it left and right slightly. I'm just going to be doing little tiny adjustments until I can measure with my dividers and find that the gap is the same all the way around, which means that these two shafts are running along the same line. There's no bend in it. If there is a bend, it just means that the engine has to bend and unbend every revolution. So now I'm going to be installing the brake. When you depress the clutch pedal, the brake engages. This is not a tractor that can be shifted while you're driving. It has to be shifted while you're stationary. So I'm just putting the far caliper in behind the disc. It would perhaps have been easier to install this before I put it in the frame, but I chose to go this route and now I've got to live with it. So here's the near side. I get that already. There's two little pins inside that will push that brake material out to grind against the caliper. Now I'm putting it in place, and there's just two bolts that hold it onto the rear axle, so you have to put those in. I tighten it with the ratchet, and then I spin the axle to make sure there's no bad binding. Now I can add the pins that I was talking about. These are what's actually going to bear against that plate, and it's going to pinch the disc, which is how the brakes operate. So there's two pins, and then there's kind of this red thing I'm putting in. It's like a cam mechanism. As you turn it, it turns the pins, which engages the brake. So when it's straight up and down, the brake is disengaged, and when it would be 90 degrees or a quarter turn, that's when the brake would be maximally engaged. So I add all the hardware the hard way. Again, probably best to install these brakes at the start. Now, this is what goes to that brake cam in the back. It's a solid rod, so you bring it up front to where that chain mechanism is. And then you can add on this really special fitting that has like a little shoulder pin type thing. That's going to go on the brake cam, and then it's going to be held in place with a cotter pin. And then the entire brake tension is going to be controlled with a few spacers and then a nut that goes on the back. So you see I've got the spacers in place and I've got a washer. Now I just need to add the nuts. And again, that's what's going to control my brake tension. Okay, now there's another part of this system. It kind of controls how tight the brakes are. So using this, you can actually turn a little knob on the side of the tractor to hold the brake in place. It kind of makes it into a parking brake. So I'm adding the mechanism here. It's going to just be a linkage that goes to a friction plate that goes to a knob on the side of the tractor. Here you see a little bit better the back where this whole cam setup is, how that all works. This is about the best shot I can give you, I'm afraid. It's hard to take videos under the tractor. Here's that friction plate I was talking about that you can use to lock the brake in place. So I've got, there's the friction plate itself. It is rough. It's rough so that it'll actually grab to the frame. So you put those parts in. There's a bunch of parts on the back that I wasn't able to capture on camera. There's the knob on the front. There's an elastic nut that you turn on, and it's done so that you can turn the knob and engage that parking brake type thing. Now I'm back upstairs, and I'm putting on, this is where the battery and the fuel tank go. but it also has the purpose of stiffening the whole upside of the tractor, the entire superstructure. So the instrument panel and the steering column are all going to be benefited. I'm putting on the other side plate. I put this on because otherwise I would have to slide the battery holder into place and I'd probably ruin my paint finish. So I put this on so that I can just stick it in place without having to slide it. There's just a few bolts that secure it to that battery holder, so I put those in first. And then towards the bottom, I once again run into alignment problems, so I'm having to use another drift to hold these pieces in line. Now I'm assembling a lever that controls the height of your implement. So I'm adding in this little latch mechanism on a spring that locks the height in place. I didn't get a very good shot for this, but that's how it operates. Now I'm adding a spacer so that it isn't going to be grinding against the frame. And I'm going to just push it through. And then my implement height lever is ready and installed. Here you see it from the other side that what the lever pivots on is basically a shoulder bolt that's just welded to the lever. So there's an elastic nut that I put on. There's also a washer. You can see here the lever is able to move. This toothed little quadrant is what's going to help it keep a consistent height. So that pin will lock into that quadrant. I'm able to turn it freely. And then now you see that the pin will lock. So I'm going to tighten this on. And then there's another control mechanism on this side. This one controls the belt tension from the engine to the power takeoff. Essentially, it engages and disengages the power takeoff. So it's going to just bolt on to the side of the frame here. There's the bolt. There's two that are going to go in. I turn them in by hand. And then I tighten them with my ratchet. Now the lever goes on the outside here. So I'm just fitting it up in place. It's fitted, the shaft is kind of rectangular for part of it, and so there's only one way the lever can go on. So you've got to make sure, just like with the clutch, that you align it properly. You don't want to be off by half a turn. There's an elastic nut that goes on there. And then now I can add this rod that's going to lead to the front of the tractor and engage and disengage the power takeoff. The rod just screws in there. So now I can get it close to the front where it needs to be. And then it's just going to go through this hole in the lever, like so. And then there's a cotter pin that I put through, and then you can splay the ends to hold it in place. This shows its operation. It moves fairly smoothly. I'm happy with that. Now I've got the problem of the lever that controls the height of your implement. It controls it at both the front and the back. So there's this linkage that's going to be leading to the front, and then there's another linkage that's going to be leading to the back. I deal with this one at the front first. I put in my little R clips to hold it in place. And then that's how it operates. You can see it's moving the implement height on both sides as it should be. Now if I want my implement height at the back, I'm going to have to first put on this plate. So it's not fitting very well on both sides, so I'm just going to get some bolts in there finger tight on the one side. And then I'm going to hammer it with my mallet on the other to drive it into place. Makes a pretty satisfying sound once you get it pretty close. I'm going to put my bolts to hold it in place. And then I've got to put, this is the thing that controls the implement height. So it's got these little flanges, don't know what to call them. I'm dry fitting it now because I don't know what orientation they go in. They seem to fit best with the bolt holes towards the inside, so that's how I'm going to install them. And then there's just 4 bolts that hold them in place. So I put those in, I screw them up finger tight, then I come back with the ratchet. Now, I don't know what they're called, clevis pins maybe? Whatever I'm holding in my left hand, I was missing one, so I have to make another. I'm making it out of this spare bolt I had. So I cut the bolts. Now I'm going to deburr the ends so that I don't cut myself. Now I'm measuring how far this hole was on that little pin. I'm transferring the measurements to the bolt that I'm cutting. I'm using my center punch to mark where the hole will go. I'm going to be drilling through this bolt to make the hole. I also move up a drill size to finish it. Then I use a half round file. I just take the sharp edges off, round everything out nicely. Now I'm going to see if the R-clip will fit. And yeah, that's perfect. So with that clevis pin, or whatever that thing is called, I'm able to go add in this back linkage. So you just push it through here, same as all the other pins. On goes the washer or the spacer or whatever you please to use. And then on goes the R-clip. And then at the back, it's the same thing. It just attaches with the pin. Hard to get a good shot here, so you'll just have to take my word for it. Then there's these things. I think they're called the 3-point hitch. This is part of that system, so you can see it screws into that pin. And then that pin attaches to the rear side of this implement height adjuster, and you attach it that way. Now I'm back at the front. I'm going to be doing some work on the tires, so I want to get the tie rod ready. So I put on this lock nut first, then I take the tie rod end and I screw it on too. Yeah, there we go. That's better. I had to replace these because the originals were just awful. They were really badly worn. So I'm passing that through, and then I'm putting it so that the bolt face is down for the tie rod. With that in place, I get distracted basically, and then I come and I put my foot plates in. So 2 bolts per foot plate. They just go to the side. I didn't suffer any alignment problems, so I put them in by hand, ratcheted them up tight. Now I'm going to the other side. I'm going to have some difficulty with this one because the clutch pedal is kind of in the way, but I'm still able to get these bolts in and put them in finger tight. And then I finish them off with the ratchet. Now I've got the rear fenders, so this is a pretty big assembly that fits rather tightly. I end up having to scratch up the paint to put it in place. The fenders are going to attach to the back, but they're also going to attach to those foot plates. So I use a screwdriver and I pry it to get it the distance I need. This is the same kind of idea as when I was using a drift earlier. These parts just don't align quite well, and these bolts are pretty small. So I need to use the screwdriver to pry them into line. Then I'm able to put all these bolts in. Now we're at the back again. It's time for the seat assembly. So I need to use my drift to align the parts. I'm putting in my bolts and my nuts. And what's important to note is that I actually added some washers between the fender and the turtle back. That's just because I want there to be a little bit of an air gap so that water doesn't get trapped in there and rust. And now I'm adding the gear shift plate cover. This is just going to go over the gear shift. It's a sliding fit in the back there. I don't think it actually has any fasteners on it either. The gear shift is able to move freely. That's what I want. So now I can come, and I'm going to add this lockout to prevent it from popping out of first gear. It's just a little latch, very similar to the implement height adjustment. And basically there's a spring that goes on it, and the spring controls how easy it is to move. So how tight I make this determines how easy it is to pop out of first with the latch on. That shows it's stuck in first with the latch. Now I move on to the steering. I'm putting my steering into the column. There's 2 bushings in there, brass or bronze bushings. There's my steering gear. It's got knife edges. I'm pretty sure it's not supposed to. I think this is fairly worn down, but I don't really see it as cost effective to replace. So I put that on the shaft. Now I'm going to put the spiral pin on. Now this grease fitting, I want to make it the screw-in type. I just prefer it, so I drill out the hole to the correct diameter for the screw-in type. I come in with my tap and I add threads to that hole. And now I'm able to put on my grease fitting. So I just put it on with a wrench. Now I've got my tires. In a different video, I showed how the tires were fixed. That'll be linked at the end. So the tires go on, the bolts go through the holes, and then you put on these nuts to hold the tire in place. Very similar to a vehicle, like a car. There I am tightening them all. And then I go around and just spin it and get them all nice and finger tight. Now I want to adjust the toe in. Basically make sure that the tires are both the correct amount of straightness. So I mark a chalk line by spinning it. Now I'm going to measure the front. See the distance between them along that line. Then I'm going to measure the back and see the distance along that line. And I think the front is supposed to be smaller by 1/8 of an inch or something. So mine needed to be adjusted. So using some math, some lever math, I'm able to determine how much I need to adjust the tie rod by. So I back off the lock nut by that amount. I confirm that it's the right amount of looseness. And then I can adjust the tie rod, and then I can put it back on. Now I want the tractor to be let down. So I jack it up and I take these supports out. This is going to let me put the front wheels on the ground. I'd like to do the same at the back. So I'm now putting, instead of nuts, there's actually bolts for the back tires. So I'm putting the back tires on. These also needed to have their inner tubes repaired. They were going flat pretty quickly. Now it's time to finish up things with the steering. So I put this shaft through the steering. This is what's going to control the drag arm. I've got my quadrant there, and you can see that my steering gear is turning the quadrant. That'll then turn the drag link. There you see it in place. Now I'm going to show you how I got it into place like that. I push it up from the bottom and I feed it through. I actually made a lot of mistakes installing the steering, like it wasn't aligned properly, so I had to do this operation perhaps 10 times. I hope it goes more smoothly for you. But in any case, there's going to be bolts at both the top and the side. So here you see me tightening the bolts at the side. Now there's this, I can only describe it as a spacer or a stiffener. It pushes against part of the frame, and I guess it just holds the steering column in place. I'm not entirely sure what its purpose is, though. So there you see me tightening the bolts, both at the top and at the side. Here's the tractor overall. Now I'm going to be doing some stuff with the electronics. The grill comes first though. That's my new voltage regulator. You can see it's more narrow than the old one, so I need to drill new holes. So I've tapped the hole, I'm drilling it with a small bit, I'm drilling it with a bigger bit, and I'm fitting my bolt in. So now I can add my voltage regulator. I'm going to put dielectric grease on the back. I'm pretty sure it needs to be grounded through its body. So that's what the grease is there to do, is to conduct the current. The grease will also help it make contact with the aluminum grill, and so it's going to be able to dissipate heat better. I badly want it to dissipate heat. So I put that in place, I put the screws through, I put the nut on the screws, and my voltage regulator is pretty well good to go at that point. Now I'm working with the ignition switch, the one that goes on, off, and starter. I'm adding the leads right now. So there's one lead. Now I've got a lead that actually will go to the starter. So it's carrying this fairly thick, beefy cable. And I'm just going to screw that on like so. There's the other lead that's going to go to the starter. Same kind of thing as all the other connections, you just screw it on. And now I'm doing some testing. So I want to check, do these headlights even work? If they do, the needle should go to the right. It should have a low resistance. Here I'm testing something that's continuous, two parts of the same wire, so that's good. There I'm testing the lamp. It has a low resistance, so that means it's good. It probably works. This one has infinite resistance, so I know that this lamp is blown out. That one's 0 because it's the same thing. This one is infinite because it's blown out. Here's the key I made, because the keys I bought didn't fit. I put it in, and now I'm going to be testing what these connections do. So I'm just, first of all, trying to see if my multimeter works. That's why I always test the same piece of material. Now I'm testing if these two are connected. These two are connected. The white and the red on the right. These two are not connected. These two are not connected. So that's with the key in the off position. Now let's put it to, this would be run. So the motor is started and it's running. There's no connection there. No connection, so there's no current being sent to the starter, and there's no connection there either. Now I want to try it with the run position. There's a little spring that tries to turn the key back to just when it's running, but this is what's going to be engaging the starter when it's in this position. So I'm checking for that. I don't see any connectivity between the red and the white leads, but when I go red to red, there is connectivity. So that would send current to the starter, which is how it should be. So that's very good. Now I needed to repair some wires. I learned how to solder in high school. It's one of the skills I've used the most in my life. So I've got it under my really underpowered soldering iron, and then I just take my really undersized solder and I feed it into the joint until I see silver everywhere, like so. So those are soldered together. Now I can put my shrink wrap over them. Usually I use a candle for the shrink wrap, but here I decided to be a little bit deranged and use the butane torch to shrink it. Now I'm adding on the cable leads. This thing's going to be going to the battery. It needed a new terminal, copper terminal, so I get it in place the way it should be. There's also a short lead for the ammeter. Now I'm going to feed solder into this connection. I want to make sure it's going to conduct electricity and be solid. So this is probably overkill. You can just crimp the thing, but I wanted to do it this way. So I melt all my solder into there. I find that immensely satisfying to do. I love to see metal flow like that. And then I decide to tape it up. This also is kind of unnecessary, but it made me happy, so I did it. So now I can add the grill. I'm going to be adding on a bunch of electrical components. So the grill goes in the front here, just slides on like so. There's 2 bolts that are going to hold the grill at either side, so I put those in. Now there's this crossbar, not sure what to call it, and there's a plate that goes on the plastic panel at the front. So I'm going to be installing that. I put in my screws and my bolts, and then for the front grill, I can put my bolts in there too. Now I'm going to come and I'm going to be putting in the throttle lever. So you just feed it through the panel from the back. Then there's some screws that hold it in place. Those screws need to go in first, and then you can put your panel on it proper. So now I'm going to be putting some screws in. They're just going to be holding down that whole entire panel. I'm now putting the knob on the throttle lever. I'm checking that it can turn. It can. That's exactly what I needed to do. Now I'm going to put in the ammeter. So I push it through from the front. And then from the back, I can connect all the leads. First, though, you have to put this odd little piece of hardware on. This is just going to hold it against the rear panel. So I get those on and I tighten them. Now I've got my lighting switch. This turns the headlights on and off. So I'm going to push that through from the back, come around to the front, and I can put on my washer. I can put on a nut. I can get this all tightened up and good to go. And then I put on the knob. Note that the knob has a little tiny set screw to locate it on the shaft. So I come in with my little tiny screwdriver and I put that set screw and tighten it up. And there I am pulling the switch, turning it on and off. One of the lighting leads was all messed up, so I'm putting on a new end, a new terminal end. Put it on there, and then I'm going to crimp it. I know this is less effective than using the right crimping tool, but I don't have the right crimping tool. I couldn't find it, so I just used the vise. Now I'm going to be putting that ignition switch through the panel. So I just push it through like so. And then I can go to the front, and I'm going to be putting on first a very nice washer. You'll see it go on here. And then there's a nut that goes over top of it and holds it all in place. And I just tighten that with a wrench to the desired tightness. Now I'm connecting all these leads. So leads to the starter, battery leads, lighting leads, everything gets connected. I'm not going to describe what's going on in the video because I think you should probably look at the electrical diagram for your machine because these do differ year by year and I don't want to mislead you. Now these are leads that are going to go to the voltage regulator and I'm just taking them off of the generator. So they're going on the field and the amateur poles. They're going to go to the voltage regulator and I'm pretty sure they produce AC currents. Now, this is coming from the starter. It's a big, hefty lead for running the starter and turning that big 10 horsepower engine over. So now I'm trying to put on new ends. These are just bullet connections for the voltage regulator. I didn't like what the originals were, so I put those leads on and I crimped them. The input ones are like a hole and the output ones are like a bullet. So that's how I differentiate the two. So the yellow ones are going to take an input from the generator. So I just connect them. They just snap together. It's a nice system. It's a bit of an older system though. And then this wire is the output from the voltage regulator and it's going to the ammeter. This is the kill switch for the engine. This will stop the engine from running when engaged. This is a ground wire I made from a length of an old jump starter, like jumper cables. I put that on the frame, I tighten it up. Now I'm going to be installing the battery, so I'm going to be putting on my leads. You want to be fairly careful, you don't want to do anything to connect the two leads. So there you see, these are just kind of an odd type of connector. They have a bolt that goes on them. I'm just putting the bolt on, connecting the battery. The battery at this point, like right now, it's live. It has charge. It's also connected to the leads. So I'm going to confirm that it'll actually start. And that's perfect. It does start. Now I can put the hood on. So I'm just going to slide that on. The hood is going to be held in place by some screws, and those screws are basically also the pivot for the hood, on which it turns to open and close. So there you see me opening the hood and proving that it works. There's elastic nuts on those screws, by the way. Now I can put the headlights in. We verified that one headlight works and one doesn't. But I can't find replacements for these things anywhere, so I just put them both in. The headlights are retained by this bezel, I guess you would call it. It's just a piece that holds the headlights in place. So I put that on. And then I can make all my electrical connections. So the headlight needs power, it needs to be grounded. I connected that all according to the electrical diagram. But since I only have one working headlight, I only bother to connect one headlight. Now I'm testing it. There's one of the headlights on. So it's a bit of a cyclops, but that's okay. We still love you. There it is in the dark. So very much proof that the headlight was work. Now I'm going to be cleaning up my electrical. I've got what's called wire loom. The wires are going to go inside of this and they're going to be neatly held by it. I'm just feeding my wires into the loom right now. The loom is kind of like a split tube. I do this in a couple of different places. So now I'm adding it to the front. What I'm doing here is I'm zip tying it, so I'm going to be holding the loom to this cross member. This is just to keep the wires neat and orderly, because if they're not neat and orderly, they have a chance of being sucked into the machinery as it's running. You don't want that. So here I'm just verifying that everything is out of the way. It's not against the hot engine. It's not against moving parts. Looks pretty good to me. I'm satisfied with that. So now I come and I'm going to finish up the seat. I add this cross member to the seat first. Tighten it up. Now I can slide the seat on, and then there's going to be a big bolt. You see it there. That's going to feed in from the bottom and tie into the seat. My seat is kind of broken, but I'm going to live with it. Now I'm putting on my steering wheel, so the steering wheel goes on. This is going to take a spiral pin, so I'm just going to drive that through the steering wheel and onto the shaft. Now I need to use my pin drive to finish it off and get it the rest of the way. And there you see it turn, as steering wheels do. Alright, now I'm going to be installing the fuel tank. This is one that I got from the scrapyard. The tractor didn't originally come with one. I didn't know what fitment the tractor would take, but I really lucked out and got the exact one. So the fuel tank is held in place by these clamps. I filed one of the ends to be square to accept the shank of a carriage bolt. And I'll just be adding in those carriage bolts like so. And that's what's going to clamp the fuel tank and hold it in place. You don't really want to vibrate and move around. There I am turning the cap all the way on. Now I'm cutting the fuel line because I'm going to be adding a fuel filter, because the tank is pretty dirty inside. That's what the fuel filter looks like, just a flow-through type. It has arrows on it. You want the arrow to be pointing in the direction of your fuel flow. Now I'm connecting it to the carburetor. The whole thing runs downhill, which is good. So now I'm doing the drag link. I've got my lock nut that I've put on, and then I've got my link end that I'm spinning on too. Go to the other side, I'm going to be doing the exact same operation. I put on the nut, the lock nut, and then I put on the link end. I'm going to be adjusting it once it's on. So here's the front of the tractor. I'll be putting that on. I'll be adding an elastic nut, and I'll be tightening that up with difficulty. So now I can go, this is where the steering quadrant feeds out. This is what's going to be turning the drag link. So again, it's going to take an elastic nut. You want these parts to be able to move slightly, because they translate an arc into a line. So there needs to be some motion that happens with them. But you want to tighten those lock nuts against the tie rod ends so that they don't move too much. This shows the steering system completed. I'm able to turn the wheels. That's exactly what a steering system should do, so I'm very happy. Now I need to tighten some bolts on the top of the engine because I had added some shroud pieces that had been taken off. I don't have a torque wrench at this point in time though, so what I'm using is I'm just measuring the length of my wrench, and then I'm calculating how much force I need to apply, and I'm using a spring scale to determine the amount of force. It's pretty primitive, but I don't know what else I can do in this circumstance. Now I'm putting on the throttle rod. I'm making sure that it doesn't interfere with any of the mechanisms. So there's the throttle rod. I get it to the length that I want. I'm putting it in place. I'm cutting it. It's just a spiral wound cable. So you can kind of undo the spiral by pinching it apart with pliers. As so. And then you can just cut that link. And then you can take the rest of the spiral off. Now I'm going to cut the cable to the length that I want. And then I can feed this whole thing into its little assembly here. Connect it up. And now I can adjust the whole throttle and its workings. Now I want to see if the engine will run, so I fuel it up. Tighten up the gas cap. And now I'm going to be starting the engine. And the engine does indeed run. So I'm very happy with that result. So now I want to be able to measure the speed of the engine because I need to set the idle speed. I have this tachometer. It operates by measuring when a reflective surface passes. So here I am just drawing it back and forth to prove to you that it does work. So it's counted all those revolutions back and forth. With the engine running, I'm now going to adjust the idle mixture. I want to change it so that it's optimum, so I go both ways until the engine slows down, and then I choose a setting in the middle of those two. Then I need to adjust the actual throttle speed, which is done by adjusting this throttle stop. So I turn that, and I measure with the tachometer, and then I adjust it. Now I'm powering down the engine, and that's the whole tractor all put together. I hope if you've got one of these tractors that this video was useful. I really do wish you the luck. There's a lot of difficult parts, but persevere and you should have your tractor up and running. Thanks. Goodbye.